Thank you so much for those introductions, and thank you everyone for joining us here today for this fantastic program organized by Asia Society Museum and Sharjah Biennial 16, exploring transdisciplinary collaborations and indigeneity across Asia and its diasporas. And I'm honored to be moderating this introductory discussion with Hoor al Qasimi and Yasufumi Nakamori, titled Reworlding Institutional Practice, which explores how Asia is being redefined through art. So in the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about the task of redefining the form and function of the arts and cultural institution in the 21st century, in response to evolving conceptions of the global, and within that, the redefinition of regions within the global context, and of course, the role of art and culture in that reworlding. And of course, we're also coming at this from the perspective of institutional practice, and both Yasufumi and Hoor have incredible experience working across regions, working transculturally. So we're just going to dive right in. There's going to be a slideshow that's just going to be on a loop, so there'll be captions as well, right? Okay, great. So with that in mind, I'm going to open the conversation with a question about the very idea of geography as an institutional mandate. So Yasufumi, of course, Asia Society has a clear mandate, quote, to navigate shared futures for Asia and the world across policy, arts and culture, education, sustainability, business and technology, unquote. But it's also a trans-global institution with museum sites in Hong Kong, Houston and New York, and offices in Los Angeles, Manila, Melbourne, Mumbai, the list goes on. And Hoor, aside from Sharjah Art Foundation, which has long been a central site of research, gathering and exhibition making and collaboration within and beyond the so-called Global South, with Sharjah Biennial 16 being a case in point, and of course with your own curatorial practice with Lahore Biennial and Aichi coming up in 2025. You're also leading the development of the Global Studies University in Sharjah, which was recently announced in September 23, and will consist of the College of African Studies and Africa Institute, College of Asian Studies and Asia Institute, and the College of European Studies and Europe Institute. And I think you mentioned Oceania as well. So with that said, as leaders of institutions creating transnational, transgeographical, and transcultural connections through the realm of art, how are you thinking about the idea of what constitutes a region when a region like Asia is heterogeneous, it's a heterogeneous geography and cultural identity that extends beyond its territory through its diasporas, and how is this informing your practice? So we're going to set the terms, basically. We know that the terminologies that we have for regions, for example, the Middle East, come with their own loaded histories. They're always evolving. So I'd love to know how you're thinking through this idea of geography as a mandate for an institution.
So may I start? Okay, thank you. A great question. We actually, I think, 15 location organization headquartered here in New York. You're right. We have 3 museums: New York, Houston, and Hong Kong. I actually look at Asia in the broadest and most expansive sense. Of course, including Western Central Asia. Really kind of covering, Asia Pacific. As a matter of fact, we have exhibition coming up looking at the bog painting tradition in Ocula in Northern Territory in Australia. Then we had an exhibition of the Iran modernism, years ago. So we look at it broadly. As a matter of fact, title of our modern contemporary curators changed recently to include Asian diaspora. So curator of Asian and Asian diaspora art. We are really looking carefully into Asia, particularly Asian population communities, in other continents, Africa, Latin America in particular, in our programming moving forward. I often think this imagination. Of course, Ben Anderson's, 80s, book, Imagine Community. I mean, the context of that was, redefining nationalism and nation, which, you know, we don't really look at it anymore. However, the power of images, you know, printed media, digital media, how that could enable people to feel they're united, right? Asia is a, in a way, social constructed community, and you know, the people who feel, you know, they're part of it. You know, doesn't matter where they are, whether they're Asian or, you know, Latin American. If they feel they're part of the Asia, you know, construct, then I want to include them as a, not only as an audience, but also, you know, subject of our studies, investigation. So that's actually how, you know, I am shifting a little bit in terms of remit of Asia.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Well, before I start, I just want to say something. I know all of us here are here but not here. Our minds and hearts are with the people who are suffering in Palestine and the ongoing genocide that is taking place. Of course, it's important to think of the genocides in Congo and Sudan and Kashmir and other places, the history of the Armenian genocide. These are all ongoing things, and this is why our platforms are important. This is why our voices are important, and this is why we're here to speak up for people who don't have the platform to speak. I just want to applaud all the students who are taking up encampments for diversity. To take up encampments to call for divestment. I think if we learned anything from apartheid in South Africa, it's about how important boycotts are, and these are peaceful protests. They are not violent protests. We need to basically stick together, be here in solidarity, and really hope for a free Palestine and the end of this long occupation. So I just wanted to say that before I start. And in answering your question, it is also this idea of what consists of Asia and all of us coming together. Like you mentioned, the term Middle East is a loaded term. My father absolutely hates the term Middle East. He refuses to hear it or to use it. So I think for us, it's really important to think of our geographies. I'll give you an example of one project that we did, which was a curator in residence that I was thinking of for the longest period. Oh, sorry, can you hear me? Carol? Is that Carol? Oh, hi. Now, is that better? Okay. Okay, I hope you heard my introduction. Okay. An example is this curator in residence program that I put together, and I realized that if people would come to find artists from the UAE, you know, we have a few artists, but to have a program that is more diverse or interesting, who do you include? Maybe it's regional, but what is our region? We're always being boxed in Arab art, Middle East, North Africa. So I decided, I mean, it was a long shot, but it worked. I decided to contact the local airline company called Air Arabia, and I used their flight map, which was a budget airline, so they had limited journeys, but now they have hubs, so it's expanding. And I decided to really think of maybe defining a region through this flight map. And ask them to sponsor it, which they did. So we stopped during the pandemic. We're hoping to bring that back up again. But we're always questioning what our region is. Growing up in the UAE, where half the population is South Asian, and many of the people are from also Indonesia, Philippines. You're always brought up in a very multicultural society. And then going to study in the UK and seeing that there weren't spaces like us. I mean, I wasn't represented in the art world. And I realized there was something missing. And maybe somewhere like Sharjah Biennial can provide it. And when I came back to Sharjah, the Biennial, I mean, people think that I founded the Biennial, but that's not true. I was 13. But I took over when I was 22. But it was very much categorized by country representation. And I found that really problematic because I thought nobody's from one country anymore. You know, everybody has, you know, mixed lineage, mixed heritage, parents from different places, they belong to different places, refugees. So I decided that it is important to break down all these geographical barriers and just look at each other as artists, as individuals, and you find so many more overlaps when that happens.
Thank you, both of you, for that. I mean, it's so interesting because listening to you speak, I was thinking about how when we were working at IBRAS, we always said that we were intending to drop our tagline of being about visual culture from North Africa, in and around North Africa and the Middle East. But also the way that we looked at it, we were just coming at it from a different point of gravity. And I always remember Arik Chen, who was formerly at M+, used to talk about that with Hong Kong, that M+ sort of looks at its position as kind of coming from Hong Kong and then looking out to the world from this vantage point, right? So it's a very different way of thinking about how an institution is defined by a regional framework. And then I was sort of thinking also about Swana, which is a new terminology that's come out, right? We used to have MENA, Manasa, and so Swana, and I went onto the Swana Alliance website, and they did make a note that while it's a decolonial word for Southwest Asia, North African region in place of Middle Eastern, Near Eastern, Arab world, or Islamic world that have colonial, Eurocentric, and Orientalist origins, and are created to conflate, contain, and I'm quoting Swana Alliance, and dehumanize communities of the region. They are not thinking about this term as a way to create a singular body, but to find a framework to be rooted together in difference. And I think, Yasufumi, you had mentioned sort of looking at relationships between Asia and Africa, and of course this brings into the framework the legacies of the 20th century and Afro-Asian solidarities that we saw with the Bandung Conference and the non-aligned movement, for instance. So with that in mind, I want to think about the task of creating institutional frameworks that engage with, expand, uncover interconnections across geographies, cultures, disciplines, and histories, which is something that connects both your practices. But in thinking about this, whether it's drawing on the historical connections between Africa and Asia, creating connections with indigenous cultures within Asia and beyond, could you talk about how you're navigating your institutions towards, or go a little bit deeper, into mediating transcultural connections in the present without falling into the trap of homogenization? And I think this relates also to another term, West Asia, in which Palestine is part. How do you find these common threads and mediate commonalities while maintaining differences? And what does it mean today, the work and the function of an art and cultural institution that is seeking connections through the regional kind of frame of mind rather than the framing itself?
I think there's one clear distinction between your journey and my journey is that, I have been working at institution. So for the past, 16 years, I was a museum curator and now a director. I was in a way institutionalized, and I was in the US, first in Houston, and then Minneapolis, and I was in London for the last 5 years, but always with the museums. They have a, rigid, actually, rules and procedures and, institutional objectives, right? Those are things, I found not necessarily constraints, but sort of like a limitation in a way that I have to be creative within that limit. And now, I'm in a slightly different institution where, it is a constellation of centers and museums, and part of us are also in Asia, although we are headquartered in New York. So, yes, I will speak loud. I'm sorry, I do speak softly.
We're very soft-spoken here.
Yeah, we are, indeed. We are not like typical New Yorkers, right? We're not Americans either, so, but I will speak clearly, yes. That's a really important to kind of construct a new framework to talk about the Asia in relation to art and culture. So one of our experiments was actually doing a triennial. That was a very ambitious project for us. I think actually we show like 30 artists. They come from, kind of everywhere, as a matter of fact. Including someone like Hamra Abbas, born in Kuwait and living in Lahore and Boston, to Reza Aramesh, Iranian artist based in London. We had some actually Asian artists who were, born in Africa in that exhibition. So I wanted to continue that way of, defining and redefining artists from Asia or artists in Asia. So one framework I'm going to bring in, it's really in partnership with Professor John Key, noted scholar of modern art, global art. In her book, you haven't read it, you need to read it, Geometrics of Afro-Asia. She's looking at actually history of art from, with assumptions of a global majority, meaning Asians are, and Latin Americans, Latinos, we are, a global majorities. And then she's looking at the understudied connection between Black and Asian artists. So, when I say Black artists, including African American artists, and also, African diaspora artists elsewhere, their connection with the Asian diaspora artists, throughout the world. And she's really kind of finding the dots and also angles and then trajectories, basically. She's speaking of this very complicated relationship with a language of geometries. So how can I work with her concept and bring this idea into the museum space? That's one thing I am going to do. And then, very importantly, we're gonna also pursue this Indigenous Asia project. Of course, Adriano Pedrosa, fantastic curator at the MASPI in Sao Paulo, he did a show called Indigenous Histories. And I realized that by looking at the show, reading catalogs, he left out Asia. So that's a vast, actually, area of indigeneity, we want to look at. And as a matter of fact, at Asia Society Museum, we created more than 250 exhibitions over the last 55 years. And we've done 2 shows looking at the Australian Aboriginal art, 1986, Dreamings, and 2002, the native land, I'm sorry, there's another, yes. So we are going to do a 3rd exhibition of Aboriginal material in autumn, Madayan, looking at one particular community in Northern Territory, Yukala, their bark painting making practice will be shown in exhibition. So we have actually a foundation to look at the vast Asia and indigeneity. So those are the 2 areas I wanted to pursue in particular. And that's in a way in response to part of your questions, Stephanie.
I have an example for how basically the Africa Institute started. So in 1976, there was a hall in Sharjah that was inaugurated called Africa Hall, which housed all the cultural events in the region. I didn't understand why we grew up with a hall called Africa Hall when we had people like Mahmoud Darwish and Nizar Qabbani speaking there, but it was an iconic place. And the inaugural lecture at Africa Hall was on Pan-Arab and African solidarity. It was on African-Arab solidarity and also taking in its main core the issue of Palestine. This conference was organized by my father, and they were rebuilding the new Africa Hall. So in doing research of what Africa Hall stood for, 40 years later, we thought it would be a great idea to establish the Africa Institute, but to look at African diaspora studies. The original conference was attended by someone from the African Studies Association Journal. And when we read the report, it said that there was a recommendation for an institute. But we thought, taking into consideration what it meant in the 70s and what it means now, to have an institute on African diaspora studies, and also for us to think from our geographies what needs to be addressed. It's about speaking on issues in an equal platform. There are no hierarchies. We collaborate with institutions on the continent. And then when I was working on the Lahore Biennial, I started planning the Asia Institute because I found that a lot of the research I was doing made complete sense for our location, also in the UAE. So we haven't officially launched the Asia Institute. It'll be very soon, but we've been working towards it. Our first project with the Africa Institute and Duke University Press was the Monsoon Journal, looking at the Indian Ocean. So that's kind of a smooth transition to the Asia Institute. Yeah.
Right, of course, and the Indian Ocean being such a great connector, right? Which sort of reminds me of Elisabetta Hetta, who's showing at Ocean Space right now in Venice, when she was talking about the Pacific being a connector, and that the world is so much bigger, and it's about the conversations happening within them. But I'd love to ask you about the European Institute. Thinking about, both of you have mentioned the diaspora, and there is a sort of post-colonial, or I guess what R.F. Jolik would call a colonial modernity, that has sort of evolved into a global modernity of the present. And, what we have then are, as you both said, people who basically embody multiple worlds at once, right? And thinking about Zeynep Sedira with her work at the Venice Pavilion in the previous edition for the French Pavilion, she was talking a lot about how there was a very strong solidarity between Italian and Algerian filmmakers in post-independence Algeria in the context of militant cinema. So I'd just love to ask a little bit about the European Institute, and because I think this also comes back to the question of, what does it really mean to be an institution in the 21st century that deals with regions, right? And, for example, at the moment now, we say the so-called Global South because that term has had its moment, right? And in the end, there's always a problem that evolves. But at the same time, as we have seen in the 20th century, or even in the present, there are times when nationalism is necessary when it's part of an independence or a liberation movement. So it's very complicated. But I remember when we spoke before this conversation, and you mentioned the European Institute, and I think it's important to mention this, actually.
Yeah, so I was looking at old geographies, so like Institute of the Americas, Oceania, but there's a lot to do and I'm taking my time. But I thought it was really important to include Europe in the conversation. It's not about not including Europe because, of course, the history of Europe needs to be addressed and looked at from the other part of the world as well. And I think these are important conversations to have. So it's really, that's why all of these institutes have come under the umbrella. So people who know how I work is I work on a lot of projects and then build an umbrella to bring them all together. So the umbrella came later, which is the Global Studies University, which is now established as university. We're working on our accreditation to have students come for a master's and PhD. We already have fellowships and talks programs and exhibitions, but I think it's important to include Europe in the conversation for sure. I mean, it is the whole globe that we need to open up these conversations, and again, solidarity is at its core.
Yeah, absolutely. And Yasufumi, I think this connects to Asia Society's mandate. It's Asia and the world, but also in the context of America and the diaspora, as you've mentioned. You're basically, I guess with Yasufumi, what I'd be curious to ask you is how you mediate that as an institution that has key spaces in the US, for instance,
right.
And thinking about the politics of representation here, for example, the term AAPI, Asian American Pacific
right.
Islanders, and there's been a lot of talk about separating these terms, right? And creating space, but as the Asia Society, obviously, and you mentioned the Aboriginal painting show from Ocula. As an institution staging exhibitions, you'll have your exhibitions that present certain regions or certain histories, but at the same time, you're operating under the umbrella term.
Right. Yes. So, engaging Asian diaspora population in New York City, including Asian Americans, is increasingly important. And we haven't really returned to this space of Asian American art for a while, since we did Shoko one way or another. It was a Margo Machida's exhibition, many years ago. So we want to offer, of course, art and programs, which relates to majority of our audience first. They are Americans often. We have a small number of actually tourists, and of course Asians who live in New York as well. I mean, my hope is that we wanted to become home for many of our audiences. It's important to reflect actually people who are coming to see our exhibition to feel they are part of the representation. So that's one thing, I take it very seriously. Going back to terminology, right? I mean, Hoor, you and I both, live in London, and we encountered this word called BAME. Remember this? Terrible. It's Black, Asian, minority ethnic. And I was like, I'm Japanese, and where do I belong?
Other.
Yes, others. So I think my 5 years was like a sense of alienation, although I had fantastic colleagues at work. But so I wonder if I could just kind of stay away from those, qualification of, Asians and also others. How can we reimagine, Asian and Asian diaspora art and culture? And for those who are inspired by Asian and Asian diaspora art and culture, so I want my program to be very inclusive. So that's my plan.
Yeah, and I think that question, how can we reimagine, brings us very neatly to the question of reworlding.
Yes.
And I'm very conscious of time, so this is going to be my last question. I wonder, so, thinking about reworlding as an institutional practice, and I think what has emerged from this conversation is that terms that we use to define regions are always fluid, and they open and close, and they create points of departure or points of entry depending on how we use them. I wonder if you could talk about the most generative and challenging lessons that you've experienced through your work, through your respective arts and cultural institutions, through your personal practice, and how have these experiences informed your own practice of reworlding, or how would you, let's say, define, for the lack of a better word, describe, how would you describe the way that you approach the very idea of reworlding as a practice?
I think mine, well, I studied art, actually. I started as an artist, and the reason I took over this job is because I realized that there weren't spaces for people like us. I didn't see myself represented in exhibitions, in spaces 20 years ago. But I find that, 20 years later, you're still getting stereotyped, you're still getting racially categorized, you're still getting, you work really hard and the same journalist comes and says, oh, but you're not a democracy. And I said, well, if it's a democracy to send people to Rwanda, then there you go. What is it? There are no more, what are these democracies that you talk about coming to speak to us from a point of, you're coming from a higher position to tell us in the rest of the world that you're not good enough. And I kept saying, we're tired of Western institutions always telling us we're not good enough or we have to do things their way. Our audiences are from all over the world. Not everyone is the same. We have to think of our cultures and our audiences and create institutions that suit us. And not everything is written in stone. I think that's the difference with you coming from the institutional kind of programs of working in different museums, where I came across it as an artist and realized, you can make your own rules and you can work together and you can kind of try to break the mold as much as you can, but you only do it through common voices. And I still think there's a lot of work to do. I thought things were getting better, and then I was shocked at some of the questions that journalists would ask, and they were very racist questions and very racist comments. And it just makes you realize that there's still so much work to do. But now there's so many of us, and there's so many of us on the same kind of trajectory with similar experiences. And, together our voices are much louder. So I think we need to collaborate more and work together.
I agree, actually. The collaboration and also partnerships are the keys to have a bigger impact. So I'm very happy to have this dialogue here at this moment. I want to sort of like not necessarily resist market force, while respecting some of the finest research done, but we have to really kind of continue to advocate on primary language research, which is so important. Scholarly research, looking at the materialities, histories, local, global histories of art. I think those are very basic sort of like foundations of, art history. But we wanted to, really make art history plural. And I think for those objectives, I think we still have to do a really rigorous research, and also speaking with artists. And I want to look at actually museum space where we show art is, it's a primary space where everyone should have access to. I think access to art is, human rights. And in particular, us, who are really working, on to promote actually, excavate artists from global south, we cannot forget that we have to continue to provide a great access to people to look at art and engage with the artist. That's my strategy. But it has to have a clear strategy and also objectives to do so. Because after all, it is map making, isn't it? It's a vast map. We are creating the dots and connecting those dots. So strategy, having a strategy in place, I think would be something I need to do. I'm into this job only 9 months, but I'm in that process right now.
So we are many, a great affirmation to end on, and make art history plural, which is a fantastic call to action. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us, and thank you to the audience for being with us. And I guess we're on to the next part of the program. Thank you.
Thank you. I am pleased to introduce 3 of 5 co-curators for Sharjah Biennial 16. First, Megan. Megan sits at the left end.
Is it going?
Megan Tamati-Quennell is a curator, writer, and researcher with a specialist focus in the field of modern and contemporary Maori and indigenous art. She has a 33-year curatorial practice and has held position at the Museum of New Zealand, Te Papa, Tongarewa, and at the Govett Brewster Art Gallery in New Zealand. Her research interests include contemporary Maori art, Maori modernism, Maori women artists 1930 to today, international First Nation art, First Nations and non-Western art in transnational context, and First Nation art curatorial praxis. Along with the Sharjah Biennial 16, she is also co-curating with the Hoor al Qasimi, you just actually saw for, the first major exhibition of the work and practice of a senior Maori artist, Emily Karaka. The title is Ka Awatea, A New Dawn, opening at the Sharjah Art Foundation in early September this year. Next, a curator who sits in the center, Zeynep Öz is a curator and writer who was co-founder and director of the Spot Production Fund, Istanbul, during which time she curated a series called Produce 123, commissioning over 30 projects. She curated an off-site Sharjah Biennale number 13 project, Bahar in Istanbul, as a SP13 interlocutor, and has edited and published numerous publications within the scope of the Produce series and Bahar. Other curatorial projects include Abou Farid War, TBA 21 on stage, PACA Award exhibition of Marwan Rekimawi's work, and Sharjah Art Foundation, Pavilion of Turkey, 58th Venice Biennale, Aichi Triennial 3, and Greatest Common Factor Solved Istanbul. Oz taught at Bosporus University, Istanbul, and served on the curricular and selection committees of the Home Workspace Program, Ashkal Alwan, Beirut. And the last, Amal Khalaf is a curator and artist who serves as a director of programming at the Cubit and civic curator at the Serpentine Gallery, both in London. Here, in other contexts, she has developed residencies, exhibitions, collaborative research projects at the intersection of arts and social justice. Projects at the Serpentine include the launch of Edgeware Road Project, Center for Possible Studies, and Sensing the Planet. She's a founding member of the GCC Art Collective. Her work, exhibitions, and research have also been represented at the MoMA PS1, Sharjah Art Foundation, Whitney Biennial, Musée d'Art Moderne de Paris, Berlin Biennale, and the New Museum, among many others. So without further delay, please join me in welcoming three curators.
Tēnā rā koutou I te iwi I ngā āuatanga o tō tātou rā e. Kia ora and welcome. I firstly wanted to thank you, Yasufumi and Dewa, and the Asia Society Museum for inviting us here today. Hold it up. Okay, and also I wanted to thank Hoor al Qasimi, Judith Greer, and عنوان al Qasimi for this opportunity. So my offering today, we wanted to start with a question. Is there a slide? Do I need to push that? We wanted to start with a question that's kind of an overarching question for all of us. What does it entail to carry a home, ancestors, and political formations with you? So my offering today comes in the form of a piece of music by Māori musician Marati, conceived and realised for a show I curated, but not the Biennale. He's in the Biennale show, but with a new piece of work, or two new pieces of work, and writing from two Asian diaspora artists, again, who are included in the Biennale. So I wanted to start with the music. I think you have to press it twice. Green, yeah. One more.
Forever on the neon river. thrown them in the skies to make a neon river. To make a neon
So thank you. So Mara is, I won't go. He's making two new works, one with one artist and a record. So my show is called We Live in Circles. It's a working title at this point. I actually wanted to start, I'll talk to this slide later. I just wanted to first start with a poem by Cynthia Mohini Simpson. She's another artist included. Cynthia is a Brisbane, Australian-based artist. She is a descendant of indentured labourers sent from India to work on colonial sugar plantations in South Africa. Her work navigates the complexities of migration, memory and trauma, addresses gaps and silences within the colonial archive. Her work moves between painting, video, poetry and performance. So the following three lines are from a poem by Cynthia called A Body Practice. And the images are from recent work and give you kind of a sense of her practice. So I'll just kind of click through them. Or maybe I can't. Can you click? So a body practice. This is a body practice. Resting, resisting, repairing, renewing, restoring, reflecting, repeating, reviewing, releasing. This is a body practice, an offering and a gesture in a world that repeats, recycling infinities. A multiplicity of memories are held in our bodies. We breathe and exhale an ocean of histories. So I just click through. Yeah, so she's primarily a painter, but as I said, also works with video and text. Her works kind of has a strength and a fragility. They're very beautiful works. I have to go backwards now. The second lot of work I was going to talk to, just very briefly, since she's making new work for the Biennale. The next images are video stills from a video work I'll show in the exhibition called, excuse me if I say it wrong, Ladhamna Tanyam, Future Continuous, 2023. It's by an artist called Subhash Thebi Limbu, who's a Yakthong artist from northeastern Nepal. He's based in the Newa Nation in Kathmandu and in London. His practice spans sound, film, music, performance, painting and podcasting. And the following is a statement from him that I've adapted for today. So he says, storytelling, indigeneity, my love of science and science fiction, it all needed to somehow come into a place. And as an Indigenous artist working on socio-political issues, I also wanted to work on indigeneity, but was not sure on ways to approach it. Octavia E. Butler's storytelling inspired me to imagine and speculate my own indigeneity in the context of future timelines. I just need to have a drink of water. I began incorporating science fiction through an Indigenous lens for my art, using our Indigenous language and script, songs and symbols. I call my practice Adivasi Futurism. Adivasi is a Nepalese word for Indigenous, but is also widely used as a collective term for Indigenous people in the sub-Indian continent. It is a space where Arawasi artists, writers, musicians, filmmakers can imagine and speculate future scenarios from their perspective, where they have agency and sovereignty, where futures can be imagined, where the colonialism, Brahmanical, patriarchal casteism and racism that has been detrimental to Aravasis, Dalits, women and queer people in the region no longer exist or become a vehicle to construct ways to disrupt and dismantle. My practice explores notions of time, space and memory and how realities could be different for people and communities. So I just want to show some images of Subhash's stills from his work. It's a really great video and is very future focused. Oh, sorry, back. Sorry, back. So my project for Sharjah has a working title as the slide outlines, We Live in Circles. The title is a quote from Anishinaabe curator Wanda Nunabush and describes a First Nations ontology. The project I will realise in Sharjah is poetic in its offering and focus on notions fixed and fluid, anchored and expansive, clear and opaque. It is informed by a First Nations positionality related to land and place. Key ideas worked with include a proposition related to our flawed humanity, notions of impermanence and of failure. Other concepts within the project include intercultural resonances and ideas drawn from the land and locality of Sharjah. There is also, like Subhash's work, a future focus within the project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Megan, for that. That's great to hear. As Megan did, I would also like to thank Yasufumi and the Asia Society, as well as Hoor, Nawar, and Judith, who are with us here in the Sharjah Art Foundation, for having us. And also want to call a shout out to our other two curators, Natasha Jimwale and Alia Swastika. They're not here with us, but we've been together on this journey for the last 2.5, well, it will be 2.5 years by the time the show opens. So it's been a really enriching and amazing experience. Maybe I'm gonna start talking a little bit about my project. Those are Megan's. No. All right, there you go. And I'm gonna start talking to the title as well, actually. That is, before I talk to the title, that is an image by Elena Scoli, who's right there. And it's a textile on which Ellen wrote a poem following a prompt by Neg McCoy. But I think I wanted to start with this image because it's a sensibility. The words, how's your heart, is a sensibility with which I wanted to sort of address and think through a lot of the questions that came up and sort of that have been going around throughout this project. So I just wanted to sort of have that as an image up there. Then I'm going to talk to the title, maybe. Yaz is a Turkish word, actually, and it has a double meaning in Turkish. The first is summer, and the second one is right. And I'm going to talk about the writing part in a second, but the summer part, I mean, we're not going through very shiny, summery times to say, but I did, the initial question with which I sort of started thinking and through which I approached people to start thinking through questions was, in this time of accelerated technological shifts, how are the economic systems that we're embedded in, the financial contracts that we sort of deal with are changing, and how's that sort of in relationship to the relational friendship contracts with which we work. How is that relationship? And then the mobility that comes about because of all of these, with all of those changes. How does that sort of affect our notions of reality, how we're living through this contemporary time frame? So that was the question I posed to the people that I approached. And that approaching came about by way of some booklets, and that's maybe the second part of that, the writing part. I have here 3 of the booklets that I started working on with with various collaborators, I guess. And this is a series of, I think, 13 in total books, but they're very different in format, and the reason why I'm bringing it up is because it says something about the process with which I do work, and I wanted to work on this project. It's sort of, I didn't know where it would go. It started out, it's in very different formats. I do want to talk to 2 of them at least, but this one is sort of like it's not an artist book because the cover design is very specific, but it is all images, and it's a work by an artist that is now going to become a commission in one of the venues in Sharjah. And then this other one is a sort of book exhibition by 3 artists, and then the last one is actually a compilation of short stories edited by an artist who also has a work that is going to be shown at Sharjah. All of that to say, I know it's a little bit complicated, I get lost in it myself, but it's basically like it was a way of sort of like approaching people and saying like, let's do something together, let's think of stuff, and I don't want to just think about it in terms of visual language, but with short stories, thinking about the possibilities of what those changes might bring about, the original question. So I was thinking a lot about science fiction, fiction, sort of thinking about how we can respond to this as in various different formats. And it's not a catalog. It's going to be, these publications are going to be done by the fall. It's supposed to be notes with which the project sort of like unfolded itself. With that said, I do want to sort of read a couple of, read the editorial note by Fatma Barkas, who's one of the artists from whom we're going to show a piece. I don't remember when I started. Please do stop me if I go on talking too much, but I do want to read this editorial. Seasons change and deer scrape the velvet off their antlers. Cicadas scream all summer long, then crawl out of their skins, leaving transparent cicada-shaped shells behind. No one brushes double-coated stray dogs, so they blow their coats with no help twice a year. We trim the suckers of our trees once a year, and we cut our hair more often. We shed skin every day, but teeth only when we were children. Not many tears are shed after any of them, only after bloodshed. We do not shed people when separating from them. Instead, we prefer to shed tears for them. For this publication, we would like to invite you to take on shedding as an analogy and a hierarchical approach to the breakage of a bond, separation due to seasonal, hormonal, physical, chemical, and emotional change. So that's sort of a good, I think, sort of approach in which we were thinking about these relational contracts that are being renegotiated in our sort of changing and mobility bound life right now. So that's one thing. There are 5 different short stories in this one. They're by Ecemar Sanay, Erika X. Eisen, Lexi Funk, Nadir Sönmez, and Ekin Tümer. So hopefully when they come out, you get a chance to see them. And the second book that I wanted to sort of mention is by Sevil Tunaboylu, another Istanbul-based artist. And this one is called Nested Corrosion, and it is actually about her, the whole book is about being inside and looking outside towards a collapsed building and seeing the sort of nestles of iron or steel at the bottom of it, and sort of thinking about the risks of going outside and trying to get outside, but then negotiating being outside and coming back inside. So for me, that was a very poetic way in which she thought visually about certain notions. So that is going to become a sculptural installation. So those two are, I mean, I just wanted to mention these also because I think they're field concept notes that are going to become something bigger, but some of these booklets are not necessarily going to. A quick word about one of the main venue within which I'm working in Sharjah. It's called Al Deid, and you can see a little bit of it over here. It's a city just about 35, 40 minutes outside of Sharjah city center, and it is actually an oasis, meaning that there is water there. And historically, it's been a place, well, this is a farm that Sharjah Art Foundation took made into an art venue. There is a farmhouse, and then a clinic at the back, so it's a larger venue. But the thing with Al Deid, the city, is actually that it was very, it's been an agricultural town that has been the venue for a lot of experimental agriculture for a long time. And for me, that was important because I don't know if I mentioned it at the beginning, but this idea of like thinking about this moment of accelerated technological changes and the societal and economic changes that brings about. I wanted to also think through historical precedents. That was one of my earlier prompts as well. And this site, when we sort of like landed on this site as the final venue, sort of prompted me to think a lot about land and agricultural practices and how that as a technology sort of shifted people's behavior and how different and work with artists who are sort of looking at that kind of change and how they're responding to it. And to that end, I'm going to show a couple of artists' works. What did I do? Oh, thank you. So this is an artist. I mean, this, I guess, is not necessarily talking to the agricultural change, but an earlier question. But I do want to talk about this work because it is a reference work for me. This is by Rafat Metzoub, who is from Beirut, based in Beirut, and he did a project, and this is a work from 2019, when the trash crisis had started out in Beirut, but not necessarily. The banking crisis was just about happening. It was pre-COVID, and the inflation hadn't gone as crazy as it is. But it is a work that was commissioned for the Beirut Art Center, in which the artist sort of took the money he was given, the $2,000 or $1,750, I think, and took 4 people and sort of went around the city, grabbed a lot of trash and brought it together in sculptural format. There's a video that goes with this process, which is 33 minutes long, in which you see the negotiation between these 4 players, how they're sort of like trying to decide. They're not artists, they're a carpenter, a street savvy. In the video, they present themselves, a street savvy person, a cameraman, and then I think the other one, I forget exactly what it is, but they negotiate, and it's about that negotiation. I thought that was a really important moment, and for me, a big reference work. The next artist that I wanted to sort of show is Jimena Garida Leca, who's going to be showing a work, and her work, she's from Peru, but lives in Mexico City, and her work has a lot to do with various Well, a lot of plans. She thinks a lot about agriculture and how that has sort of redistributed economies with respect to industrialization and urbanization. And she does usually take a very specific plant and sometimes other natural material. In this case, coca leaves, actually, but she's also worked with tobacco, she's also worked with silicone, and sort of thinks through the redistribution of that plant and how that sort of like talks about the history of that locality and sort of the extractive economies that come with it. And then lastly, I did want to touch upon one more person who I think really talks to the idea of this project, and that is Mahmoud Khalid. We are doing a commission with him. Mahmoud usually works with notions of identity, how identity is shaped, especially under the systems that it is present in, whether they be gender-related or political or anything thereof. For the commission that we're working on right now, he's thinking about this this concept of Vision 2030, which is a thing in the region with a lot of different countries, also in Egypt, where Mahmoud is from, and he's thinking about what that means to be sort of negotiating that idea of the 2030 of a futurity and sort of thinking and shaping it, and that will be also in El Date. So those are some snippets. But yeah, thank you.
Where's the clicker? Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, both of you, and to Yasufumi, everybody here, the Sharjah team. Yeah, it's great to summon. It's interesting. This is the third time we've publicly spoken about this, and it's really interesting to do this as a collective that's not completely present all the time, so each time is different, but everything worthwhile is done together. Yeah, so I am approaching the Sharjah Biennial 16. Like when I received the invitation, I grew up in Bahrain, so I grew up just an hour away from Sharjah, and I'm half Bahraini, half Singaporean, so like kind of looking out from two island coastlines across waters that connect to an Indian Ocean. And for me, Sharjah has always been a space of learning. I think Stephanie described it really well as like this gathering space of learning and research. It's a biennial, but it's many other things. And it has been since 2005 the most consistent space, art event biennial I've ever visited, and has absolutely been a school for me. And so when I was invited to do this project, I really started to think about the spaces of learning and communing and gathering that were impactful for me growing up in the Gulf, not very far away from Sharjah. And so these places for me have often been held by women. They're spaces of change, they're spaces of navigating transition. They're spaces that hold histories of resistance and struggle, as well as cultural practices that are not centered in the mainstream, often shiny, often male, Bedouin narratives of the Gulf. So I've named this project Throwing Shells, and this name actually is, we say it in different ways in different parts of the region, but it describes a form of local divination that interweaves storytelling, sensing from the shells that are thrown, collective discussion, learning, and action. And I learned this practice from my regular duties growing up as the granddaughter of a lamenter in Manama in Bahrain. And my grandmother would go every day to this community space where she would lament and hold space for people, often women that were grieving and processing not just deaths in the community, but many, many things were happening in this space. And in the back room, I would go and hang out with the girls that were also helpers. And we would learn, we would throw shells. And the name for the lamenter, or this reader, it's a garaya, that was what my grandmother was named, is the same word for the garaya, the reader of the shells. And so I started to think about this idea of throwing shells as a space of community, a space of learning. It's a space of navigation. Throwing the shells became a constellation or a document of a set of alliances that could be forged in collective resistance to the sweeping narratives of dispossession and loss that we're all experiencing. And in the conversations I was having with artists, this was often the story that I would give as an offering at the beginning of our conversations. And through it, we've decided collectively as a group of artists through various conversations to think about throwing shells as a way to think, as a methodology for listening, lamenting, remembering, unlearning, and also as collective action. So I have a set of questions I've been working with, and so I'm just going to read them. At a time of political violence and environmental collapse, what rituals, methodologies, and practices serve as a form of resistance and wayfinding? And a question I think that's very relevant at this moment, and thank you, Hoor, for pointing out where we are and the city where we are, because I'm based in London, but I'm all over the world right now, and everybody in the world is looking to the academic institutions in the city. And I think a question that I've been thinking about is really, can the work of artists, of institutions, of academies, and the site of a biennial, can these really be spaces where political agency can be reclaimed? It's a question I think we all need to ask ourselves every day. And can a biennial be a school for us to unlearn, to commune with others, and to use all our senses to imagine a more life-affirming future? So in my regular practice as a very institutional curator for over 15 years, people know me as someone who works with artists for a minimum of 3, and the longest project I've worked on is 10 years. So even 2.5 years for a biennial is like actually really short time for me to develop projects. And it's because I really think about collective processes and how we can bring a process of change through the making of projects together. So I wanted to start with this image, which is actually one of the few artists that are presenting existing works in throwing shells. So this is works by Nasser al-Yusuf. I just wanted to summon them quickly. There are, Nasser al-Yusuf is a Bahraini artist who was born in 1940 and passed away in 2006. And in the 1990s, early 1990s, he lost his sight. He's from one of the 33 islands of Bahrain. He's from Maharag, and he made a lot of these drawings after he lost his sight from memory and from the island, kind of depicting rituals, much like my grandmother's rituals that I described earlier, but all from memory. And he was doing them at a time whilst the island he was from, you know, he's depicting here, these are 2 works that depict kind of rituals by the sea, and his island was being reclaimed and being connected to the main island. I'm from a 33 island archipelago that is slowly becoming one block of an island. And I just wanted to summon this idea of ecological loss, and speaking from coastal communities, and it's something I'm really thinking of as this practice of memory and bringing this practice, this kind of resistive memory through an artist's practice as a form of resistance. There are a few artists that are included in the biennial that are working from islands. Originally, that was kind of a politics that I wanted to work with. Like, I feel really strongly as an islander, as, you know, everyone's talking about ecological collapse from like mainlands, and actually the islands, we're the ones that are facing it the most. And so there's another artist from Singapore, Himan Chung, who's going to present new work called Perimeter, which is a practice that he has. He's a Singaporean artist that he does a lot of walking. He has an amazing YouTube channel, actually, you should check out, where he walks. But he's taken a series of photographs. We'll be presenting them in Sharjah at the Biennial, but it will first be shown at UCCA in June, in October, in China. I also want to present this work by Hoor al Qasimi, which maybe is, they're the only shells that are in the show. But these, Hoor al Qasimi is a Kuwaiti artist who's based in Berlin. A lot of her practice that kind of spans video and sculptural work really is speaking to the impact of oil, histories and future in the Gulf region. This particular work I'm really interested in. It's going to be presented at the Biennial. This is an installation of it at the Kunsthaus in Bregenz in 2023. So this is a real project that speaks to sensing with shells. These are 3-meter-long sculptures, and you can put your ears against them, and you're about to maybe listen to the ocean like you would with another shell. But in fact, these shells are storytellers that will speak to a story that was written in the Emirates. It's called The Diesel. That speaks to the experience of transition from a kind of more sea-focused culture in the region to an oil nation. The color red and the shells are depicting, actually, going back to this idea of the sea and the ecology, the color red that's used in a lot of ships to protect ships from barnacles and mussels that often attach themselves to ships. But one of the kind of offshoots of humans invading the seas with their trade and capitalism is what's happening to these shells is not only is this paint resisting them growing on the ships, they're actually turning a lot of shells female to male. Specifically these murex shells that you can see depicted here. So it's kind of talking about this kind of loss of this species of shells, which happens to be the same shell that Shell Oil Company originally used as a botanical drawing for their brand back in the day. But this shell is now kind of transitioning to a completely male species and will no longer reproduce. So yeah, you'll hear voices that are also androgynous, telling these stories, and we're thinking about the different ways human and non-human tell stories. And this is also really relevant to this project. So this is an installation shot of a work by Stephanie Komelang that is more kind of akin to the kinds of projects I'm working on. A lot of the projects I'm working on, and maybe we'll have time in the conversation to talk about it, are co-commissions, and I really, really believe in collaborations, but also what co-commissions can afford artists in terms of where their work can be shown, and the conversations this work, which is called Search for Life, which really speaks to questions of migration and histories of colonization, what it means to show it in Spain, which is where this was, it's still on show right now at the Thyssen Museum in Madrid, and what it would mean to show it in the Philippines or in the Gulf. So Stephanie Komelang is a Filipino-Canadian artist, incredible artist, represented by Silver Lens, which is here in New York. She has, a lot of her work is about home, about migration, and she describes a lot of her filmic work as science fiction documentary. So I was really interested to do a commission with her. She's been thinking a lot about seafarers. Filipinos make up 25% of the total labor of the world seafarers. And she's been kind of thinking through this idea of the seafarer for a long time. And in this work, we are imagining this as a diptych. So the first episode was born here in Madrid and is a film that really interweaves the stories of seafarers, the histories of the galleon, the Filipino galleon, who were the original people who mapped maritime trade routes in the world that the Europeans discovered in the 16th century. And then, and also kind of telling contemporary, very poignant testimony from seafarers who are now artists, poets, singers, and florists, as well as the story of the monarch butterfly, who, as a kind of species, do a very incredible migration across the world that takes sometimes many lifetimes. And so she was really thinking about this idea of transformation, how moving home, how movement and being away from home is a process of transformation. And in it, alongside this film, she presents these kind of spectral figures wearing butterfly embroidered piña material cloth. So piña is made from pineapple fibers. So you can see Stephanie here working with this incredible costume. You'll see them across a lot of Spanish colonies, former Spanish colonies. The pineapple isn't native to the Philippines, but becomes the symbol of the Philippines. The Europeans brought it there. So she's kind of like thinking through this material. And for the biennial, for the Sharjah episode, she's already started to think about the position of Sharjah as a port. We are working with a lot of Filipino communities there, and she's going to be extending this question of post-colonial identities of Filipino workers there from the position of Sharjah. So I'm really, really excited for this commission and really grateful for the partnership with TBA 21. So the next image is, it's not going to be in the exhibition, but these are images, stills from a really well-known film called Layla and the Wolves from 1984, which is directed by a Lebanese filmmaker called Hani Srour. And I kind of wanted to start with this to kind of talk more about processes that are happening in the many commissions I'm working on at the moment. And it's really thinking about something that's coming through in a lot of our projects, which is histories and memory and current practice of friendship and feminist solidarity. And Layla and the Wolves, it tells the story of Layla, who is in London and at an exhibition of photographs of the Palestinian struggle. And she's kind of there and seeing that there are no women in any of the photographs. So she kind of travels back in time and you can see here in the top left image, kind of gathered around her ancestors and her descendants. And she's kind of traveling back in time to kind of find out and share the role that women played in histories of feminist struggle in the region. I'll be quick. This is all to say that this is another film. This is the actual film that I'm working with Hani Srour. So this is called The Hour of Liberation is Upon Us. And basically, I'm going to be presenting, this is a film that Hani did in 1974, where she actually went to Darfur and was traveled miles and miles. She's one of the only filmmakers to document the Darfur rebellion that was, for the most part, a feminist militant rebellion. It's a history, it's like a leftist resistance against the British occupation at the time. And it's not a story that's told. And I spoke a little bit about kind of history stories, people that are kind of left out of the mainstream narrative of the region. And this history of struggle is one of those. And we'll be working with an archive there. And I'm commissioning some artists to think and work with this archive, not to just remember and unlearn kind of the more right-wing oil capitalist version of history of the Gulf, but also this more resistive, feminist, militant, leftist version. So I was just going to end with playing a song by Bint Mbarah, who's one of the artists I'm going to be working with. She's Palestinian, based in London, and she's been relearning some of the songs from this rebellion.
ساعة التحرير دقت برا استعمار سوف يتحدى وجودك شعبنا الجبار شعبنا الواعي مسلح قوة وإيمان للكفاح نادى بصوت يزعل الطغيان نهار والأفكار ضاعت خشية الشجعان تسحق العدوان دوما إرادة الأحرار ساعة التحرير دقت برا استعمار سوف يتحدى وجودك شعبنا الجبار.
I'm not going to play all of it because of time, but I'm just quickly going to say the translation of this song. So, ساعة التحرير دقت برا يا استعمار kind of translates to the hour of liberation has arrived, but it misses out in the translation out the occupation. So they're singing this song, this very famous song from this time, and I feel like it's very relevant to the times we're living in now. So the lyrics go, the hour of liberation has arrived, imperialists out, our people are conscious and armed, it alarms our oppressors, the will of the people shall defeat the aggressor, we are ready for the hard fight, rise with courage, remember the past oppression and poverty, move forward, turn Amman's oppression into light, Arab workers and students unite. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have just one question, just mindful of time. We have 5 minutes to talk about this. So you all have actually strong curatorial practices, previously, and also, for the Sharjah Biennial, you have defined themes, and some include commissioning. Some have a more historical, reflection than contemporary. So, and also 2 more curators, they're also with you. What is the process to work together to make one large biennale? I'm thinking like a 5 circle diagrams, and then there's 1 or 2 areas overlap. How do you work together? Okay, like this? Yeah.
That was an amazing summary.
Yeah, kind of like that. Each of us have been able to do our own project, but interestingly, we've presented a number of times to ourselves, not only to the public. To ourselves, we've presented our projects as they've evolved, and they're still evolving, they're not there yet. And there are some very interesting kind of connections and overlaps, and also divergences. So, and I think out of the 5, there's a real respect for each other's practice, each other's curatorial practice or methodologies, which are different too. We work differently, we think differently, we operate differently. So it's kind of the diversity is the strength. But as I said, conceptually, there are synergies and resonances between the projects. So it's kind of like together apart, which sounds a bit weird, but we're kind of together, but we're also individuals. So does that make sense?
I mean, I just not to add anything, but just to say, it's been amazing to have such a wide range of reference points where we can check and say, what do you think of this practice, or what do you think of this, and to have an encyclopedia of knowledges, yeah.
And I think there's something about the process that has been about listening to each other, and as you said, it was really great hearing you start off with the offering of the sound, because I think that's how we presented a lot of some of our ideas of what it means to work with each other, how we presented artists that we were in conversation with, and somehow organically, even from the commissions of the artists that are being made right now or being proposed, there have organically been a kind of telepathic listening, and works are beginning to speak to each other in ways that we didn't plan.
Thank you so much. Yes,
before we
Zeynep?
wrap up, sorry,
Yes.
I just I just want to note that Joe Nami and Akira Ikazoe, I think he's in the room, who are 2 of the artists who are going to be there. Megan is going to be talking to Stephen, but I just wanted to, I don't know if I'm missing anyone else, but I just wanted
There's
to
also
mention.
John Klang who's here.
Great. I think actually after artist conversation, Megan and Stephen. We'll have some time over refreshments and also cookies. So let's hope actually to spend some time with the artists. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, mihi atu kia koutou. Ko taranaki te maunga, ko waitara te awa, ko tiatiawa rau ko ngaitahu oku iwi, ko mururau patu rawa ko o tākou oku marae, ko raniera rawa ko Ngāniwala oku tūpuna, ko Megan Tamati-Quennell taku ingoa. So the brief little mihi I gave there introduces me and gives you a sense of my place in the world. It's also delivered as a thank you and acknowledgement to the Sharjah Art Foundation and the Asia Society for inviting us here today. I also wanted to briefly introduce Stephen J. Yazzie, the artist I'll be in conversation with, and who is part of my project for the Sharjah Art Biennial. Stephen is Dene, please tell me if I say that wrong, Pueblo and of European descent. He lives and works in Denver, Colorado, and is a member of the Navajo Nation. Stephen is a painter, photographer, installation artist, and also works in video and film, and was a founding member of the Indigenous arts collective Post-Commodity. He recently had a solo exhibition, Meandered, which opened at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver. So we're really just going to talk quite generally about Stephen's work and practice. I didn't want to give everything away just yet. Everything's still in process, and so I wanted to leave something for people to come and see. So kia ora and welcome, Stephen. Thank you for making the effort to come to New York at quite short notice and for this conversation. So I wanted to begin really by handing over to you and asking you to kind of introduce yourself in a way you would like to, and then we'll go from there. Thank you. Oh.
Yaate, Stephen John Yunishye, Belagana Nishli, Traji, Dene Basaschin, Belagana Dashache, Ado Sinagini Dashanali. Hello, my name is Stephen Yazzie. I am the White Man clan, born for the Turkey clan, and those are my, from my maternal side, and my paternal side is also the White Man clan and the Black Streak Wood People clan. I'm an artist, as you mentioned, from Denver, Colorado. I grew up in northern Arizona on the Navajo Reservation, and I'm very kind of familiar with that southwestern region of the United States. A lot of my work kind of comes out of that. Thank you, the foundation, for bringing me out, and thank you for the invitation to have this conversation. So, looking forward to, sharing a little bit of my practice, and also, as Megan mentioned, kind of, just a peek into some things.
I just also wanted to. There was an artist who was not acknowledged earlier, which is Hugh Hayden, so I just wanted to have a shout out to Hugh, so thank you, who's in the Biennale as well and in the audience. So we were going to start really talking about, I wanted to ask you about post-commodity and your work in that collective. This is an image of post-commodity. I kind of knew of post-commodity through the Close Encounters exhibition that happened in Winnipeg in 2011. I was kind of involved in selecting the New Zealand artists, and then I didn't get to go. Creative New Zealand said, you can choose to go to Venice and support Michael Parikowhai, or you can choose to go to Canada, or it was you or the artists. And so I said, well, you've got to let the artists go. So I didn't get there, but I was kind of interested from that point in, and I think the first work I really did see was this next work that I will show, which was called Do You Remember When, at the Sydney Biennale in 2018, was it? Oh, 2000, I thought it was 2018, the Biennale.
It's been a while.
Okay.
So yeah, I was one of the founding members of Post-Commodity. That first picture was an older picture of us.
Oh, that one, yes.
Yeah, that I sent you. Nathan Young, Cade Twist, and eventually Raven Chacon joined us. Just to kind of, as a kind of starting point, I know we're going to get to an image with the balloons, but there's a, we really came together and maybe started conceptualizing our collaboration as far back as 2007.
Right.
And we were really thinking, we all kind of had different practices, or we were coming from different places at the time. Cade was working in as a policy wonk in telecommunications, so he was in a different field of practice. And Nathan was a filmmaker primarily, and then I was already a working artist. But and then Raven eventually, he was, this was like post Cal Arts, I think, and he was, all of them were very heavy in the noise scene, in the music and the sound scene, but we all brought different ideas and maybe strategies or approaches in the collective, and I think that's where we've found some interest. And this piece here that we're looking at, this was one of this work kind of solidified our working together, in that we had to learn how to negotiate those relationships with institutions, and also how can we create something that also involves or brings the community in.
Yeah.
So this piece was, we were invited to for a residency with the ASU, Arizona State University Ceramic Research Center, and so they had invited us in for a residency or to do some work with them, and we came in as what are we going to do in the Ceramics Research Center, and this was close to the time that they were going to transition this space or move this space.
In Sydney?
It was in Tempe, Arizona.
Oh.
But they were going to move the collection, or they were doing something so the space was going to open up. And it got us thinking about the institution itself and where it was situated, and being that, why don't we go straight to the earth in terms of ceramics and material. And we were able to, so we negotiated taking this section of the floor out.
But this is in Sydney? Or
No, this one, this
is in Sydney.
The first iteration was in Arizona.
I'm confused.
But then it was done again in Sydney.
Okay.
We worked. We also, in the process, we opened up the floor, right, and we exposed this earth. And in the first version, I can't remember how it played out in Sydney, but the first version of this was working with the Gila River Indian community, which was, there were community members from this same region that the museum was situated on. And we worked with a bird singer and learned the collective. We were invited to learn a public song. And so what plays through the floor is that song.
Not in this one, though, in the first.
Not in this one. Well, in this is the...
No, this is in Sydney.
This one's in Sydney. Okay, so for the first one. They didn't look so similar. The sound coming from the floor plays... is picked up and it's mic'd. It's playing through an amplifier, and also there's a guitar leaning on the back of this piece, so that it creates this sense of feedback, or the sound of feedback. So as the space gets occupied, it also changes the vibrations and the sound of the rock, of the stone. So it becomes this generative kind of sound piece as well.
So was that, you're talking about the one in somewhere else?
I'm talking about the original piece, so.
Okay, so I don't know about that one at all, so I'm very sorry. I was really talking about the one in Sydney, which is the first one I kind of experienced.
Sure.
And I didn't know it was an iteration because that was never stated.
And that was?
Of course.
Okay.
And for me, I understood it as about listening and also kind of revealing the land that the gallery sat upon, and the idea of taking the floor out. And I think there was a song, but it was maybe to do with local. It worked with local people.
Well, and just so you all know, too, I had left the collective at the point that this piece had gone in.
I did not know that either.
So I had moved on, but this was still I was part of the first version of this. So when you sent this to me, I was like, God, I don't remember the I don't see the speaker.
No, I don't think there was no guitar. As far as I knew, there was feedback, but through that microphone, and maybe there was an amp. But it was really about the song of the earth at that point. And from what I understood, it was about listening and revealing the lands on which, and had worked with local community, the Eora Gadigal people in Sydney, that the gallery sat upon. And I think, it was quite interesting that I think there was some opposition, as I understood it, for them cutting open the floor of the gallery and removing a part of it.
I think in both situations, we ran into that. It's definitely in the beginning, because we had to work with engineers and we had to really, pitch our case and talk through the reason why we wanted to do it and the value in it and the importance in it. And it went through, and so that kind of negotiating became part of, maybe it became part of a methodology with the collective, and was something that was almost expected with some of the projects that we worked on.
It was such a significant work in Sydney in that it did engage local community and did talk, fundamentally about how the gallery kind of operated and what its relationship was to that land and place. Even though there were kind of land acknowledgements, it was and it was definitely a standout work of that Biennale. Can we move on to another work?
Let's move on.
So the next work, which I do know you were involved in, was a second work which really kind of struck me from post-commodity was called Repellent Fence. And it's been described as kind of an Indigenous response to land art. But for me, interestingly, it floated and was in the sky and it did not touch the ground at all. But it was, and it's been described as a monument that bidirectionally reached across the US-Mexican border as a suture which stitched together the people of the Americas, symbolically demonstrating the interconnectedness of the Western Hemisphere by recognising the land, Indigenous peoples' histories, relationships, movement and communication. And I also understand, so it stretched right across, didn't touch the ground, which I thought was interesting, because one of the criticisms of the land art was, the kind of excavation into the land and making land do things that it perhaps wasn't supposed to do. Sorry. And then the other thing that I was really interested in is that the colours and the symbols on those balloons were also kind of really relevant.
And this is interesting because I think the slides that you're seeing, so I was a part of the foundation or the formative years of post-commodity, but this work, I was invited to come back and help them document. So I was not in the collective at this time, but this balloon installation began when I was with the collective, and it started off with in thinking about how can we, excuse me, explore. Oh, I've got one here. Thank you. Got bubbly. It began in with this balloon actually. I don't know if you're familiar with it as a garden device for keeping like birds and animals out of the garden. So it's got the scare eye. It's supposed to, the garden version is just a small, 16-inch, in diameter balloon that you can hang in your garden. And so we would see these in Arizona, and people would use them in their gardens, and we just thought it was funny because after a while, the birds would all come back, and it wouldn't really have a lasting effect. But there was something about the design of that eye and we thought about what would it feel like to have it at scale, and to create something that was maybe 10 feet in diameter. And the first time we did that, we had a residency in the Czech Republic. And we just hauled this big balloon into the Czech Republic on a residency in Slavonice, and tried to find helium in the middle of nowhere, which is really hard to do. But anyway, I was invited back when when Post Commodity finally realized this piece at the border near Nogales, that it intersected. They had talked about running the length of the border, and then they had eventually came up with this design. I thought it was really interesting. They invited me back to document this. So this is one of my images from one of the drones I had, and we had a team in the U.S. and a team in the Mexico side, and we were able to. And that again was, there was a lot of negotiation with even Border Patrol to be able to have access to certain areas, but it was a community collaboration as well, because there was community partnerships in the Mexico side that were really helping, see this piece installed, and it's a kind of ephemeral moment, at that time.
So I asked about the colours and symbols on the balloons. I know there's a scare eye, but there's also the colours, which I understood were kind of sacred colours.
They are sacred.
That have been used forever. So can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, well, and us coming as a collective, we're all from different tribal communities. So these colors, this balloon has a couple different colors itself. I think there's a black version, but they are like sacred colors, especially for the plains, some of the plains tribes. For me as a Navajo, our colors are black, white, blue, and yellow, and they denote mountains and times of the day, times of our life, cycles of our life. But these, so that I know they talked about that in the coloration of these.
I was going to move on to the next lot of images.
More post-commodity
work
that I wasn't a part of.
Involved with. So this was, there are a couple of images, just really quickly. There was a major show in 2022 curated by Gerald McMaster at the Remai Modern in Saskatoon, and I don't know, obviously, I don't know if you can talk about these. So Time Holds All Answers was the survey show, but I understand that at that point you'd actually left.
I did, but I could say, we did work with, Kate and I actually worked with Gerald McMaster's on an exhibition, a remix exhibition, I think, at the AGO in Toronto. And Gerald McMaster's, I thought, was a pretty significant curator when I was first introduced to him in his approach, in his curatorial approach in showing or presenting work that from different communities, but maybe about or something very specific about a location, but that there were two different worldviews essentially that were being shared in the space. And I thought his approach, his curatorial approach in that way was pretty interesting.
So this is a second image from that time. No comment. No. Okay.
But it's I guess I could, I'm attached to the legacy of it, so it's kind of cool to see. I mean, what they're doing now I think is still really relevant and important, but it was very formative for me too as an artist and as a conceptual practitioner, to be a part of the collective, and I have a lot of fond memories working with all those guys, and we're all still friends today.
And it was interesting when I approached Stephen to talk to him about work for the Biennale, or to consider being part of the Biennale. I actually didn't know he was in post-commodity. I hadn't done my homework. And I have one of the other artists, Raven Kachon, who was an ex-post-commodity artist. I think you assumed I knew, but I was like, I had no idea. Raven thought it was hilarious that I didn't know. Because I actually came across your work. There was a show called Throwing Stars Over Monsters, which is the title of this photograph. And to me, it was a photograph. There were also a number of paintings that looked like they were of very kind of important, we would call them wahitapu, or kind of sacred sites, or sites of cultural significance. And so I came across your work really through a website of a show that had been held at Gerald Peter Gallery in Santa Fe. And that's kind of where I first engaged. Can you talk about the image that's on screen called...
I did this one.
Yeah, he did this one.
Throwing Stars Over Monsters was an exhibition I had last summer, and this was this is the title image and piece for the exhibition. It included video installation, drawing and driving work, large-scale abstraction, and photograph and photography. I just started showing my photography work, and it's interesting because I don't feel like I'm a photographer. I kind of see these more as objects or constructions because of what happens in post, or even just like making sure the work that goes into finding the site. But this location, I was thinking about this idea of merging concepts and this, that we're always dealing with the overlap of so many things in our life and in our work. And this location is significant. Tebeta'i is the name in Navajo, and it's a shiprock in northwestern New Mexico. It's the translation in Navajo is bird with wings, or the winged bird, and it's a place that I would travel through or past when I was younger, and it's a culturally significant site for Dene, for Navajo people, and it's also one of many locations that has a number of stories that are associated with it, and that are all sometimes a little divergent, sometimes a little different. And I always thought it's pretty interesting to have these significant sites that from different regions of the reservation or from the community, that it's interpreted and understood in different ways.
Different things.
So, and just briefly, I'll tell you, the two stories that I was thinking about with this work was, and how the title happened, was how this rock was. One story was that it was the Dene, or the Navajo in the north, were kind of at odds with each other, and they asked for help and prayed to the medicine man, and the medicine man, the earth rose up like a wave and brought the Navajo people to the region that they're at today. And then the other one has to do with monster birds that were capturing and taking the men from the communities and devouring them. And Monster Slayer, one of the twins, born for water, and Monster Slayer were the twins of Changing Woman. And during all these battles years ago, that Monster Slayer ended up killing the monster eagles that were capturing the men, and then created the first eagle and the first owl. So two examples of this, the significance of this location, but also the stars. Coyote created the constellations, or the Milky Way, and the story of Coyote in Navajo mythology is really steeped in as a trickster character. But I've always seen Coyote, or I began to see Coyote more as an innovator, or somebody that idea of pushing convention and pushing the chaos.
We have a similar character called Maui, who pushes everything, and someone once described him as the first artist who pushed the boundaries of everything. He slowed the sun down. He did a number of things, turned himself into a lizard, and tried to become immortal. So there's all these things that he did. So he was a shapeshifter, time traveler, and trickster, definitely. Yeah.
And I'll mention that, though, because the idea of throwing stars over monsters became this. It became this way in to create this new body of work, this new series of work. So some of this that we'll begin to see.
So I'll just flick on to the next one. I was also interested in the giant eagles because we also have a giant eagle that picked up people, didn't necessarily eat them, but did pick them up and move them around. But only in the South Island.
We were hungrier. I think it was.
Oh, hungry. Oops, sorry. Back. Okay, so there are two other photographs in this. One of them is called How to See, this first one here. And so I kind of wanted to ask what you meant by that title and if you can kind of talk a little bit about this image.
So a lot of my photography tends to be a kind of a byproduct of documentation. When I'm, a lot of times I would be out filming, filming the landscape or shooting video or shooting drone work, and I would also just document and take photos and stills just to have as a resource. But I started thinking about locations on the Navajo reservation where I grew up that were, so there are, I think, over 500 uranium mines that have been decommissioned or closed, that aren't active anymore, but they're still, it's kind of a legacy of our impact, the human impact in tribal communities. And so this was shot near one of those areas. And it was, I've been thinking about how so many of our stories, these emergence stories, looking through or passing through other worlds to get to the present, are so much about transformation and metamorphosis and the dynamics of that. And so it's always things in flux. And so that became, how to see is maybe this idea of what's our relationship to perception, to location and the locality, and like how is this, the journey toward the, something toward the other side. The rainbow is also
significant.
What's that?
Is it significant, the rainbow?
It is. The rainbow is significant as a protector. So you see it in our weavings, in our sand paintings, and it kind of it's that symbol of protection that we carry, or that is an element from the earth and the sky that surrounds us, regardless of the state of the land.
It's interesting because one of the artists I'm putting your work with in Sharjah, his family say they're descendants of the rainbow. So it's kind of an interesting kind of little connection there. Yeah. The next image is again another photograph, and it's called Falling. Again, it's obviously taken from, is it a drone photograph?
This one is actually shot with a different camera, but not in the air, but it is like many of the shots that I take from this vantage point. And this is a pretty common, we see it a lot now. I was just in the lobby for the exhibition that's up now here. There's there's a couple books, a lot of aerial photography.
Yeah.
But this is also related to the video. I have a video called Earthlines Deneta 1, which is a collage of natural and man-made lines, or the topographies that are, in the video it feels like falling, cascading land, but it continues on, and you're following through different regions of the reservation, but also these locations are all connected, whether it's water or mining, whether it's coal mining or uranium mining. But these specific types of views of the landscape, I think, for me, are about mapping, about surveillance,
yeah,
about a very specific way we manage our lands, and we look at land. And it's a very unique, view of the earth, and also, seeing the earth, from these vantage points often reveals
something else,
something enigmatic, or something that carries a new story. And also the colors. There's a coloration that if you were to see the whole image, there's a gradient coloration I think it's at the bottom, and they're falling. There's a rock in the river in the shot. That's not in this image. That's the reference because the perspective or it's composed in a way that feels like you're seeing a rock fall. That or what I saw, but it's there.
So the last images is this first one, which the final two images are paintings, your kind of very abstracted landscapes, which are really vibrantly coloured and quite gestural and have lots of energy and movement.
Nice to see them that big.
Yeah. So your recent paintings are described as capturing familiar yet indiscernible geological forms, rocks, rivers, flora, fauna. Can you talk a little bit about your painting practice, please, and the difference between your paintings, photography, and I know you have this drawing practice, mobile drawing practice that you have. I mean, I kind of read your paintings as much more kind of intuitive responses to landscape, and rather than kind of literal depictions, they're kind of remembered or sensed, or can you?
So the paintings for me become a very different, they're very, I started moving into this kind of hallucinogenic abstraction. I was thinking about these, like they feel like hallucinations, and hallucinations for me are as close to, there's a relationship to the spiritual, right? But there's an exhibition that's up at the museum in Denver. The title is Meandered, and so I specifically use that as a tool or methodology, like in the process. All the paintings are created without, I'm not using any photographic references, although I have photos or video. And the idea with these is to create that sense of the earth, things in flux, yeah. and the feeling that this feels like it could be a location or place, but it's not specific. This feels like a rock or a tree, but maybe it's falling apart or coming together. And you're not sure, so you're in this. It's constantly in this state of transformation.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something that nature reveals, to me that I want to kind of incorporate into my way of painting these. And so I'm coming up with motifs and a process. And there's not really a true formula, but. And I never know how these are going to end up, but I know, but as painting can go, I get to this point and they all become, and I know when they're finished. Yeah, and I'm just in love with these right now. These are just
Me too.
Yeah, they're good.
And there's this last one here.
This is a kind of a formative one into this series. So I did this painting last summer, and this is all relatively, from the photograph to the paintings, these are all relatively new this last year. But yeah, this is kind of building into that. So there's a couple paintings that are significant in this trajectory or in this series, yeah. And they're foundational, and this definitely is one.
And that's us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.